So the key Russian railway hub at Novocherkassk has been hit for 2 days by the Ukrainians.
Вот он. Ух ты, на ЖД вокзал уебал. Охуеть.
Ukraine has hit a key rail hub near Rostov and has done for the past 2 days.
Ukraine's latest deep strike on Rostov's railway hub wasn't just another attack. It was a calculated move targeting the heart of Russia's southern logistics. This wasn't random destruction. The explosion forced ammunition trains to halt for hours, creating immediate ripple effects that stretched all the way to frontline artillery units. Rostov, a vital supply artery, suddenly became a choke point, exposing the vulnerability of Russia's war machine. Here's how one remote strike in Rostov threw Russia's southern supply chain into chaos, and why this single event could trigger a cascade of setbacks for Russian operations. The target. Why Rostov's rail lines are Russia's weak spot. To understand why the Rostov rail hub became a priority target, it's important to look at its role as the main artery of Russian military logistics in the south. Rostov isn't just a regional transit point, it's a strategic command and distribution center, linking Russia's interior to the front lines in Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, and the Zaporizhia front. The headquarters of the Southern Military District is located here, coordinating operations and moving personnel and material to key conflict zones. This rail network supports the daily movement of ammunition, fuel, and reinforcements, sustaining the Russian military's operational tempo across multiple fronts. The sheer volume and critical nature of these logistics make the Rostov hub uniquely vulnerable. Most Russian military supplies, especially ammunition and heavy equipment, move by rail. When these lines are disrupted, the effects are immediate and widespread. Russian railways reported that 26 passenger trains were delayed for up to 4.5 hours due to drone debris at key junctions in the region. These delays highlight how even a brief interruption at Rostov can set off a chain reaction, stalling not just civilian traffic but also military convoys carrying essential supplies to the front. Ammunition trains, in particular, are time sensitive. Any delay in their arrival can leave artillery units without the shells they need for scheduled strikes. Rostov's railways serve as the main conduit for supplies heading to the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which remain central to Russia's military campaign. The same network extends southward, providing logistical support and enabling the movement of equipment and personnel toward Crimea. These connections are not just convenient, they are essential. When a strike halts traffic at the Rostov hub, military planners are forced to consider alternative routes that are slower and more exposed to attack. Rail traffic may be rerouted through less direct lines, increasing transit times and creating new vulnerabilities. In some cases, supplies must be shifted to road transport, which is less efficient and far more susceptible to interdiction by Ukrainian forces. The geography of southern Russia and eastern Ukraine amplifies the impact of any disruption. The region's vast distances and limited infrastructure mean there are few viable alternatives when a major hub like Rostov is compromised. Logistical bottlenecks develop quickly, and the Russian military's reliance on predictable, scheduled deliveries turns into a liability. Delays compound as trains back up at secondary stations, and the challenge of coordinating resupply missions grows more complex. For Russian commanders, the sudden loss of efficiency translates into operational delays. Artillery units wait longer for ammunition, armored columns risk running low on fuel, and frontline troops may miss scheduled rotations. Beyond logistics, the disruption at Rostov carries significant symbolic weight. The uninterrupted operation of these rail lines has been a visible sign of Russian control and organizational capacity. When trains stall and supply chains falter, the narrative of invulnerability is undermined. This has a psychological effect not only on Russian planners and troops, but also on the civilian workforce responsible for maintaining the network. The knowledge that a single strike can paralyze a critical hub far from the front lines introduces a sense of uncertainty and vulnerability that is difficult to dispel. The timing of the attack on Rostov further increased its impact. As Ukrainian counter-offensives intensified, Russian forces redeployed significant resources to reinforce their southern positions. This placed additional strain on the Rostov hub, with military analysts observing a surge in traffic along these lines in the weeks leading up to the strike. By targeting the hub at a moment of peak demand, Ukraine maximized the disruption, forcing Russian logisticians to scramble for solutions under pressure. The attack on Rostov's rail lines also fits into a broader Ukrainian strategy of targeting key nodes in Russia's logistics network. This approach, sometimes described as logistics annihilation, seeks to create systemic chaos by striking at critical infrastructure points such as railways, fuel depots, and transshipment centers. The goal is not only to slow the movement of supplies, but to create persistent uncertainty, forcing the Russian command to devote increasing resources to defense and contingency planning. In practical terms, the consequences of the Rostov disruption are already visible. Delays in ammunition shipments have affected artillery operations in Zaporizhia, while interruptions in fuel deliveries threaten the mobility of armored units in contested regions. Each new bottleneck compounds existing challenges, stretching Russia's logistics system and increasing the risk of operational setbacks. Pinpointing and striking such a critical node within Russian territory requires more than just opportunity. It demands careful planning and precise execution. The question is, how did Ukraine manage to reach so deeply into the heart of Russia's logistics network, and what methods enabled such a precise and disruptive attack? The strike. How Ukraine staged a precision blow. Deep inside Russia, striking the Rostov rail hub required more than opportunity. It was the culmination of months of refining deep strike tactics and exploiting vulnerabilities in Russia's infrastructure. Ukraine's campaign has evolved from sporadic attacks to a systematic effort to hit critical nodes far from the front. The Rostov operation stands as a testament to this new phase, blending advanced technology, intelligence and timing to deliver maximum disruption. Ukraine's reliance on long-range drones has grown, with each operation demonstrating greater reach and precision. On June 1st, Ukrainian forces used drones to strike 4 Russian military airfields, damaging 41 planes, including heavy bombers and rare A-50 spy planes, and reportedly disabling 34% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. These attacks, confirmed by open-source intelligence and reported by the Kyiv Independent, reveal the technical sophistication and strategic intent behind Ukraine's deep raids. The Rostov strike fits this pattern. A remote high-value target chosen for its logistical significance and struck with accuracy. However, drones are only one part of Ukraine's toolkit. Ground-based sabotage has played a significant role in disrupting Russian logistics. Documented incidents include the attack on a fuel depot in Belgorod, as well as disrupted rail yards in Peshanokopskoye, Rostov, and Bryansk. These operations suggest the presence of Ukrainian operatives or sympathetic insiders capable of bypassing Russian security and physically sabotaging infrastructure. The pattern is clear. Ukraine combines external strikes with internal disruption to maximize impact. Coordination between Ukrainian intelligence and local collaborators is a defining feature of these operations. The GUR, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, has demonstrated an ability to synchronize attacks with precision time. Like the precision attack on the Crimean Bridge, where insider intel allowed drones to slip through layered defenses, the Rostov operation likely relied on a similar blend of surveillance, real-time data, and trusted contacts on the ground. This approach enables Ukraine to exploit windows of vulnerability, striking when logistical flows are heaviest or when Russian defenses are distracted. The timing of the Rostov strike was not coincidental. Russia's logistical network was under strain as it moved reinforcements and supplies toward the Zaporizhia and southern Ukraine fronts. Reports from the Kyiv Independent highlight a broader strategic shift in Ukraine's drone campaign, with a focus on infrastructure nodes that underpin Moscow's war effort. By hitting the Rostov rail hub during a period of peak demand, Ukraine ensured that the disruption would ripple outward, affecting multiple supply lines and amplifying operational challenges for Russian commanders. The psychological dimension of these deep strikes is significant. By targeting infrastructure well inside Russian territory, Ukraine undermines the perception of security and control. For railway workers, military logisticians, and civilian managers, the realization that no hub is truly safe from attack creates uncertainty and anxiety. Each successful strike prompts a reassessment of security protocols and stretches already limited resources, as Russian authorities scramble to repair damage and restore confidence. Evidence of Russian air defense vulnerabilities has become increasingly apparent. Ukraine today noted that in earlier long-range raids, Russian air defenses failed to intercept fixed-wing drones over 200 kilometers inside Russian territory. Rostov's rail hub, despite its distance from the front and the presence of layered defenses, was still vulnerable to attack. This exposes a persistent gap in Russia's ability to protect its most critical infrastructure, encouraging further Ukrainian operations and complicating Russian planning. The Rostov attack is not an isolated event, but part of a broader Ukrainian strategy to systematically degrade Russia's logistical capacity, and created persistent uncertainty across the network. Each operation compounds the logistical stress, eroding the reliability of Russia's supply lines and straining the ability of frontline units to sustain operations. This calculated pressure on Russia's logistics network sets the stage for cascading consequences. The immediate delays at Rostov are only the beginning. As trains back up, supplies are rerouted, and confidence in the network erodes. The effects spread quickly across multiple fronts. Russian forces must adapt to new vulnerabilities and inefficiencies, while Ukrainian planners look for the next opportunity to exploit the system's weaknesses. The impact of the Rostov strike extends beyond the damage to infrastructure. It signals a shift in the balance of initiative, with Ukraine demonstrating the ability to reach deep into Russian territory and shape the tempo of the conflict. The disruption at Rostov is the first sign of a broader unraveling, a single blow that sets off a chain reaction throughout Russia's war effort. The Domino Effect. How one strike unravels Russia's war effort. Halting the Rostov rail hub struck at the core of Russia's logistical operations, immediately slowing the movement of fuel, ammunition, and military equipment to the front lines. Rostov's position as a central node meant that any disruption forced Russian planners to reroute supplies through longer, less efficient, and more vulnerable pathways. Delayed trains and rerouted cargo created immediate shortages for frontline units, particularly in regions like Zaporizhzhia and Crimea, where the tempo of operations depends on uninterrupted resupply. In a system built for just-in-time delivery, even brief interruptions can trigger a series of compounding failures. The effects of this disruption were not confined to a single region. Over 20 trains in southern Russia, 10 in Rostov and 12 in Krasnodar Krai, were delayed by drone debris alone, illustrating the scale of the logistical paralysis. These delays forced Russian logistics teams to improvise, sending trains on extended detours and increasing both transit times and operational costs. The resulting bottlenecks slowed the arrival of ammunition and fuel, leaving artillery units in places like Belgorod facing supply shortages that persisted for days. Delays in the arrival of reinforcements and armoured vehicles further complicated Russia's attempts to hold defensive lines or mount counterattacks. Each missed delivery increased the risk of local collapses at the front. As the supply chain faltered, Russian commanders faced a dilemma: continue to rely on compromised rail routes or shift to road transport, which is slower and more exposed to Ukrainian interdiction. The over-reliance on secondary rail lines created new vulnerabilities, as these routes lacked the capacity and security of primary corridors. Each adjustment in logistics introduced additional friction, with every rerouted train becoming a potential target for future Ukrainian strikes or sabotage. The system's fragility became more apparent with each passing day. The timing of the Rostov attack amplified its impact. Ukraine struck as Russian forces were repositioning to reinforce threatened axes in the south. The disruption coincided with Ukrainian preparations for renewed counteroffensive actions, ensuring that Russian units at the front would experience shortages at the moment when operational momentum was most critical. Fuel and ammunition arrived late or in insufficient quantities, directly undermining Russia's ability to sustain high-tempo operations. The effects were not limited to the battlefield. Railway workers and infrastructure teams were pressed into emergency response, with firefighting trains deployed to extinguish fires at Kamenolomny station, diverting resources from routine repairs and maintenance. This logistical chaos translated into concrete operational disadvantages. Russian artillery units, already under pressure from Ukrainian advances, faced periods of inactivity as shells failed to arrive on schedule. Armoured columns risked running low on fuel during repositioning, while frontline troops encountered delays in reinforcements and rationed supplies. The network's interconnectedness meant that a single disruption at Rostov set off a chain of delays across multiple sectors, complicating Russia's ability to coordinate and sustain its defense. The psychological consequences of this disruption were immediate and far-reaching. Soldiers on the ground, accustomed to reliable resupply, now faced uncertainty about when or if critical supplies would reach them. Reports of persistent shortages spread through units, eroding confidence in the logistics system. Railway employees, thrust into the role of first responders, faced increased stress and risk as their workplaces became high-value targets. The perception of invulnerability in rear areas gave way to a growing sense of exposure. For Russian planners, the attack on Rostov forced a fundamental reassessment of logistical security. Resources were diverted to protect and repair critical infrastructure, stretching already thin manpower and leaving other sectors exposed. The need to monitor and defend an expanding list of vulnerable nodes diluted the effectiveness of Russia's overall response. Each new bottleneck required additional oversight, further straining command and control. The broader message was clear. Ukraine's strategy of targeting logistics was not limited to isolated incidents, but represented a systematic campaign to degrade Russia's ability to wage war. The Rostov strike demonstrated how a single, well-timed attack could trigger a cascade of effects, disrupting not only the flow of material, but also the confidence of those tasked with sustaining the war effort. Delays, shortages, and uncertainty became routine, undermining the predictability that Russian operations depended on. As the repercussions of the Rostov attack continued to unfold, the impact extended beyond logistics. The strike challenged the perception of security deep within Russian territory, raising new questions about the resilience of critical infrastructure and the psychological state of those defending it. This disruption did more than slow trains. It shifted the atmosphere within Russia's war machine, setting the stage for a new phase of the conflict where confidence and morale would prove as decisive as firepower. The psychological game. How Ukraine is winning the mind war. Ukraine's campaign against Russian logistics is as much about perception as it is about physical disruption. The psychological game, how Ukraine is winning the mind war, plays out in the shadows of every explosion and every delayed shipment. The strike on Rostov's rail hub sent a clear, unsettling message across Russia. Critical infrastructure, once considered untouchable, is now vulnerable to precision attacks deep within national borders. This realization unsettles not just military planners, but also the civilian workforce and the broader population. Russian authorities moved quickly to contain the narrative. Official statements from emergency services and regional officials, such as Governor Yuri Slusar's reference to drone debris fires, attempted to frame the incident as an accident or technical failure. Yet pro-Kremlin Telegram channels posted videos of stranded trains on flooded embankments, directly contradicting these claims. Footage of burning rail cars and the deployment of a special firefighting train at Kamenolomny exposed the true scale of the disruption. The visible gap between state messaging and the reality on the ground eroded trust, fueling suspicion among civilians and infrastructure workers alike. As satellite imagery and social media evidence mounted, the Kremlin's attempts to minimize the incident appeared increasingly unconvincing. This trust gap is further widened by Ukraine's strategic silence. Kyiv offers no confirmation or commentary on cross-border operations, leaving Russian officials and the public to speculate about the perpetrators and the scale of the threat. The Kyiv Independent notes that the destruction of key railway hubs creates a pervasive sense of insecurity, showing no location within Russia is safe. Each unexplained explosion or fire becomes a potential sign of deeper, coordinated sabotage. The ambiguity surrounding these attacks increases anxiety, as Russians realize that neither official reassurances nor silence from Ukraine can guarantee safety. For those on the front lines of logistics, the psychological toll is acute. Railway employees, once accustomed to routine operations, now face the constant threat of attack. At Kamenolomny, 3 dispatch personnel were evacuated when roof fires broke out from falling drone debris, an incident that transformed an ordinary workday into a crisis. The knowledge that their workplace could become a target at any moment undermines morale and efficiency. What was once a predictable environment has become unpredictable and hazardous. Each shift is now shadowed by the risk of sudden violence, and the sense of control over daily tasks is replaced by persistent anxiety. Russian troops along the front lines feel the effects of these disruptions in every delayed shipment. Supplies that once arrived reliably, fuel, ammunition, reinforcements, now move along uncertain routes subject to delays and rerouting. This unpredictability creates cascading stress within units already under pressure from Ukrainian advances. Soldiers question whether reinforcements will arrive in time or if critical supplies will be intercepted or delayed. The Rostov strike, timed to coincide with heightened Russian logistical activity towards Zaporizhzhia and Crimea, intensified these doubts. For frontline personnel, logistical uncertainty translates directly into operational risk. At the command level, logistical officers and planners confront a new reality. The immediate aftermath of the Rostov attack forced the rerouting of more than 20 military supply trains, as reported by Ukraine today. Each detour introduces new vulnerabilities: longer travel times, less secure routes, and increased exposure to further Ukrainian attacks. Road convoys, pressed into service as substitutes for rail, are slower and more susceptible to interdiction by drones or artillery. The requirement to protect and repair multiple hubs simultaneously strains available resources and complicates efforts to maintain battlefield momentum. Mitigating one vulnerability often creates another, compounding the psychological burden on those responsible for sustaining operations. The wider Russian public, observing these events unfold on social media and Telegram, reacts with visible unease. Channels fill with posts expressing frustration at the government's inability to secure critical infrastructure and fear of further escalation. The Kremlin's narrative of control is weakened as videos and first-hand accounts circulate faster than official denials can be issued. Each new incident chips away at the illusion of safety, even in regions far from the front. Ukraine's refusal to claim responsibility for these strikes amplifies their psychological effect. The lack of acknowledgement from Kyiv leaves Russians guessing not only about how these attacks are carried out, but also about the extent of Ukraine's reach. This strategic ambiguity keeps Russian officials and the public in a state of heightened alert, unsure where or when the next strike might occur. In contrast, Russia's own information operations tend to emphasize civilian targets and publicize military actions. But Ukraine's focus on precision, strikes against logistics and military infrastructure, highlights a different, more calculated approach. The psychological impact of Ukraine's campaign is cumulative. Each successful strike disrupts not just the flow of material, but also the confidence of those who depend on it. Doubt becomes pervasive. Doubt in the security of infrastructure. Doubt in the reliability of supply lines. And doubt in the government's ability to respond. This erosion of certainty weakens Russia's overall war effort, forcing leaders to divert resources, attention, and manpower away from the front lines to address vulnerabilities at home. As Ukraine continues to target key nodes in Russia's logistical network, the psychological dimension of the conflict becomes increasingly prominent. The strikes on Rostov and similar hubs are not isolated acts of sabotage. They are deliberate efforts to undermine the enemy's sense of control and to introduce persistent uncertainty. This evolving strategy signals a shift in the nature of modern warfare, where the mind is as much a battlefield as the terrain itself. The strike on Rostov's rail hub highlights Ukraine's deliberate shift toward asymmetric warfare, where precision and disruption take precedence over sheer numbers. Attacks on logistical lifelines, rail lines, depots, and supply corridors directly undermine Russia's operational endurance. From Kamenolomny to Belgorod, each precise hit deep inside Russia widens those cracks, reinforcing a campaign designed to trigger cascading logistical failures and erode frontline morale. Ukraine's approach now relies less on massed formations and more on autonomous drones and intelligence-driven strikes, a shift made clear since the June 1st raids on Russian airfields. If you follow military tech and strategy, subscribe for our next deep dive on Ukraine's latest counteroffensive innovations.